Tell me, what do you think is the relationship between memory and love? Or what does love have to do with memory? Coming up. So in this video and many videos to come, I'm actually going to explore biblically Jewish themes and concepts that actually you'll find talked more about in Judaism than, say, at church or in Christian books. Now, I may be pushing some buttons here, but when I was studying rabbinic writings like the Mishnah, Talmud, and the Siddur, there were things that, yes, you had to give grace for, and sometimes outright forgiveness, especially on the subject of women. But I also discovered a bunch of Jewish themes, concepts, and categories that helped me appreciate and connect with the Old and New Testaments even better. And yes, I said the New Testament. Believe me, I didn't see that one coming either. Anyway, in my rabbinic literature studies, I quickly learned that as believers in Jesus, we needn't be afraid or maybe even too proud to study and glean from Jewish writings that have long preserved important Jewish categories that the Bible, our Jewish Bibles, assume, but which is foreign and often missed in Christian thinking and Christian reasoning. Now, don't hear me wrong. There's a ton that Jewish people, and especially the rabbis, can learn from the Christian world, especially when it comes to theology and interpretation, prophecies, and, well, the most obvious one, Jesus. But as believers, that's kind of usually how we think. Others must always be the ones to learn from us. But alas, all truth is God's truth, right? We all agree that, like with anything else in life, God speaks to us if we tune in and intentionally listen for his voice, right? And like with anything else, if we go in it with discernment, wisdom, and faith, I believe we'll reap great and hidden things that we did not know. Now, for those of you still watching, I want to begin by discussing what is my absolutely favorite and most beautiful, transcendent Jewish concept in Scripture that, in fact, Judaism considers of utmost importance: Zachor. This is the Hebrew word for remembrance. So our question today is, what is the relationship between memory and love? Well, according to the book of Deuteronomy and Zachor, everything. The Jewish historian Yosef Chaim Yerushalmi tells us that Zachor is repeated nearly 200 times in the Hebrew Bible, with both Israel and God commanded to remember the Sabbath, to remember the covenant, to remember the Exodus from Egypt, and even at times to remember certain people. As Yerushalmi suggests, one might argue that the commandment to remember has been central to the survival of the Jewish people in the diaspora for over thousands of years. How else can we explain the continuity of the Jewish people through millennia of migration, persecution, destruction, and renewal? Now, while you see the concept of Zachor referenced throughout all of Scripture, it is the book of Deuteronomy that really capitalizes on it. When we read Deuteronomy, we get a good glimpse of how Zachor was indeed indispensable to Jewish survival and Jewish identity, an identity that has always been set apart and holy. But we also see how Zachor is also the master key to the greatest commandment: love toward God and love toward people. This entire book, and I could argue the whole Bible itself, is premised on a psychology, if you will, that says right love is based on right remembrance. And so almost every other verse in Deuteronomy either beckons, commands, insists, pleads, and repeats in a new way to not forget, to remember the Lord their God and his works in their lives. Deuteronomy 4:9 says, "Be careful and watch yourselves closely so that you do not forget the things that your eyes have seen, nor let them fade from your heart as long as you live." Verse 23, Be careful not to forget the covenant of the Lord your God that he made with you. Deuteronomy 5:15. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Deuteronomy 6. These words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your houses and upon your gates. So what we just read are examples of all the different ways that God repeats the message of Zachor to Israel before they entered the Promised Land. And basically there are 4 ways that he tells them to remember. First, in the positive, remember. For example, Deuteronomy 5:15, remember that you were slaves in Egypt and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Second, in the negative, do not forget. For example, Deuteronomy 4:7-9, Deuteronomy 6:12, and really all over the book of Deuteronomy. Third, in the idiom form, write it upon your heart, such as in Deuteronomy 6, and these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. This is, in fact, a way of referring to memory. And fourthly, God repeats the message of Zachor in the action of doing or keeping a commandment as a way of remembering. As in the example, teach these things diligently to your children, bind them as a sign upon your hands, observe the Sabbath, and the more obvious one, take care to follow the commands, the decrees, and the laws that I give you today. And you know, even Yeshua himself tells his disciples to do this in remembrance of me, in Zachor. So, in fact, the New Testament follows right in step with these ancient Jewish patterns.